back. I'm Emily Johnson, Certified Financial Planner and Managing Director at Polaris Capital Advisors, and I am joined once again by Todd Harlow of Work Plan Retire, Retirement Plan Specialist. And we have been discussing income in retirement, sort of that holy grail of financial planning. In our last segment, we discussed the fact that we have to have the humility enough to know that we don't have tomorrow's newspaper, that we don't know what kind of an environment you're going to be retiring into, but we need to have the tools to help you plan to be successful in retirement. So while that first segment probably scared the pants off of some of you, it was really designed to say, yes, this is reality, but there is a process. And we know that when we're talking to clients about spending in retirement is really the biggest question. And I'm going to just throw my dad under the bus with the first story here because, and I'm sorry, Dad, but when I talk to my father, who maybe he'll retire someday, I don't think he ever wants to, he always says, well, how much money will I have in retirement? And I say, well, Dad, what are you planning on spending? And he about crawls under a desk because he doesn't want to go talk to my mother about that, which makes a lot of sense. And I see that with a lot of clients. But the reality is I can't help him unless he tells me what he's thinking he's going to spend, because then we can actually apply that to our financial plan. But the other thing is, I know my parents, and I know most of my clients pretty well. They're not going to spend the same thing every year. Something might happen in their lives. Something might happen with the market. There'll be different pushes and everything. So the point is, spending is important. So the second step in this process is really looking at a consistent spending process. And it's not as simple, not to scare you, but it's not as simple as just saying, hey, I want to take 4% of what the gross is of my portfolio every year. Even though some people might like to make it that simple, most of the time that really is not what's going to get you to the finish line. So we want to talk to you about one process called the endowment spending process that we feel is a better scenario, and it's a little bit more complicated, but that's why we have Todd here.
Well, no, yeah, great. And we, to just jump back a little bit, this whole thing is about income being a process and its benefits versus maybe just relying on a product, right?
Right.
Things have changed, interest rates are down, so this process is having a huge impact on creating longevity of income in retirement.
As you were saying before, the need for flexibility. That's
right.
what I left out, was really the need for flexibility because we don't know what's going to happen.
Right, which gets us to the storm. Mm-hmm. We watch, if anyone here in the Southeast is watching, and being that it's local, I'm guessing, I think it was the European model and the American model, whatever.
With the spaghetti models.
Exactly, and it went 50 different directions, and who was right?
And I was watching it consistently.
I don't know who was right. But
I think the
takeaway was prepare.
Right.
Get off the roads, board up your house, whatever.
Right.
And that's where we're going. And the first module we said, as you mentioned, scare the pants off them, was the humility to say we don't know what's going to happen. Meaning
it wasn't really designed to do that, but it probably did.
It's all the models we have to prepare. And the first one is talking about spending, which gets into advisor leadership. It gets into a lot of things, right?
Which is really what people don't like talking about. They don't want to talk about how much they spend. If you put together a budget, it's like asking them to go write a manifesto or slit their wrists. I mean, it's getting a budget together is not people's favorite thing to do, especially married couples.
So let's talk about that, because one of the things we talked about earlier was the academia that's behind some of and the credibility behind some of this. Bill Bengen is credited with this thing, is a financial planning guru, about this thing called the SafeMax, which was this study done to find out what is the number, what's my number,
the magic number.
Like they call it a yield, or on my nest egg, that I can take out that will give me the highest likelihood of not outliving it, considering the uncertainty of market conditions.
Right.
And it's come down based on changes to 4%. Now,
it had been 5% a few years ago.
That's right, and which is based on changes.
Interest rates, and yep.
And we say this all the time. If you don't adjust or have flexibility built into your plan, we laugh. And the old joke is, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. You got to have flexibility to adjust. And those adjustments typically are market conditions, most importantly, your life situations,
right.
Like maybe you were impacted by the hurricane, it could be anything, but your own life conditions, and inflation. Those are the three biggies: life events, inflation, and market conditions. And to not account for those in the financial planning world or in our world is frankly foolish. And we definitely—
That's what we do.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when someone says, what's the number? Like a lot of things, it depends. But the 4% was one, but the reason why I wanted to highlight that is it's challenging. And you mentioned 5, and we're going to include 5 in this model we're going to show you in a moment. But Not a lot of people, that's a sobering number, and it takes us to the first element of this, is one of the ways to create longevity is just flat out curbing spending. Like you mentioned with
Nobody
your father.
likes to hear that,
no one
though.
wants to hear it.
No.
But I think, I say this often, our job as advisors, me in the corporate retirement world, you in working with individuals, we're disciplinarians if we're honest. If you want to call yourself a market prognosticator, have at it. We have a lot of experience between us. I think it's difficult to do that, and I think you're deceiving your clients in large degree. But I really think we are leaders to our clients. I use the term disciplinarians, but in spending is a big part of that.
It is, and I have clients that call me that will say, Emily, can I do X? And sometimes it's been built into the plan and sometimes it's not. Sometimes we have to adjust accordingly. But I think that we are relied on, at least I like to have that type of relationship so that my clients feel open enough to call me and say, hey, this change is going on. Hey, we might need to think about such and such an adjustment. Can I do that? How can we make that happen? That helps me do a better job, but we need to be flexible, and so we try to design plans that are flexible. That said, there is sort of a magic to looking at spending in retirement, and there are some better ways to do it. One of them, as we said, is called the endowment spending model versus just that magic number, which is now the 4%. And
let me clarify that. We've used a couple, we told each other we'd throw challenge flags when we started using too many buzzwords. And the words are lifestyle spending versus endowment spending. Again, lifestyle is what we all think of as what's my number? How much can I spend? It's what has been built into financial planning for quite some time. And when someone says, or maybe even a computer program says 6,000, whatever the percentage is, it's largely unrealistic because it doesn't account for changes. Quite simply, endowment does. The three biggest ones we mentioned: inflation, market conditions, and your own issues in life.
Right.
And so, Emily, why don't you explain this? I'll lead it off. This was arguably a disastrous time to retire. It was 1973. You had terrible markets and high inflation. Not good for a retiree.
Picture, close your eyes if you
exactly. So the red line, by the way, this is 5% lifetime, which is the old set it and forget it.
This is assuming the standard $1 million portfolio that we always see, $1 million portfolio on the day that you get your silver watch or gold watch and retire. That's where we're starting right here.
And you've got, go ahead, take it away.
Well, no, we talked about the magic number very briefly, and one magic number that used to be discussed was 5%. If you took 5% out of your portfolio on an annual basis, starting with $1 million back in 1973, which we showed previously was sort of a bad time frame. If you took that 5%, you would ultimately end up running out of money somewhere around 1994.
Actually, 87.
Is that the 5? No, that was the 5%. I started with 5%. If you took 6%,
I'm sorry,
that's okay. If you took
yeah.
6%, 1% more, just 1% more, it sort of seems like a rounding error to most people. If you did that, you actually ran out of money about, what is that?
88.
88, but so about 10 years earlier. So that 1%, that rounding error is, it's a problem. So when we're looking at just coming up with one number, it's very clear that there's a lot more that goes into this than just a standard percentage. There's a better way.
Right. So again, the leadership and discipline of the advisor, and if you listen to nothing else, the planning process that you ought to go visit with your professional, the Emily of the world, at least to get what I call the big reveal. What can I spend this year? Because the implication, in my opinion, of financial planning is I've done it. I did my physical 20 years ago.
Right.
And as your dad being a physician will tell you, that's dangerous too. You think you're okay and you have a heart condition and don't know it. This is the same thing. And so just to understand the discipline and leadership of the advisor, it can be worth just as little as 12 years just based on leadership.
So what's the better way?
We mentioned endowment. We said we would not use jargon. Endowment, again, to remind you, is simply taking into consideration lives. And endowment, by the way, these are some of the most respected pools of money in the world that use this method for longevity. We're talking Harvard, Yale Foundation, and like Rockefeller, all use this to different little points. The only real perceived negative to this in the financial planning world is it's just not as easy as lifestyle. But we just mentioned to you and showed you the perils of lifestyle. But never fear, the easy button is right here, or right here. This is what your professional helps you with. They'll do this for you, and this is why you should go for the big reveal. So why don't you walk them through the same scenario, 1973, and two dramatic differences.
Well, basically what this shows is very similarly, if you were to take out 5% from your portfolio every single year, you'd ultimately run out of money, as we said. If you tweak that meet with your advisor, tweak that, and use instead the 5% endowment model, which basically takes the lifestyle model and tweaks it based on various conditions that we're not going to get into in a lot of depth, but the conditions that we've discussed previously. If you tweak it and you spend accordingly, your portfolio not only will last you a lifetime, but you'll probably end up with funds left over. So it's a small change, but it's something that you really should look at and take those variables into consideration and not just assume that there is a magic lifestyle number.
And in closing, the best part, this is controllable. This is a fixed portfolio in both instances, and every time typically in these situations, people look for portfolio changes as the magic issue, and we said we can't typically time it. Go with what's controllable. The endowment model is a controllable metrics that can be repeated.
And that's part one of our process in how to handle retirement income. So please stick with us. We'll be right back.